Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. We are going to get started in just a moment. We do want to go over a few things this morning on how this webinar is going to function, because we do have a task to ask of you. Throughout the course of this webinar, we encourage you to send questions and comments by utilizing the Q&A feature of this webinar. And there are also points of the presentation when we are going to prompt you and ask you to purposely write in their responses to some questions or comments. So again, this is the Q&A feature. I want to quickly bring your attention to it now and just ask you to click that Q&A button on your screen, and then you can just type in there anything. Say hello, give us your name, whatever you want, and that just will help you get familiarized with it, and it'll help us see that everybody is using it, and we can see those questions come in through Q&A. And also, we have enabled the feature so that as any participant types a question into there, all other participants should be able to see that. That'll help us reduce any repetitiveness. It also gives you guys a chance to know what other people are asking about. So again, the Q&A features where we really want to focus all of your comments and questions and the responses to any time that we queue you up throughout the presentation for it. All of that is saved. We will be able to share that with the group at a post-webinar. So how are we doing on Q&A responses?
Good morning, everybody.
Perfect, perfect. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to make sure that we're all familiar with that. I think we're good on that. We're recording on our end. I'm not sure if there's any other housekeeping. At any time, though, if you have any technical problems, again, use that Q&A. Flip us a quick note. I'll be floating around in the background and be here to help us should something come up. But it looks like we're solid and good to go. Ronnie, no request for help? Nope. All right. Well, without any further ado, I'm going to step aside and we'll get started.
Thank you, Tony Brownell. OSPI is so glad to have you back. Very pleased to see you today. So my name is Kim Rakedahl. Good morning, everyone. I will be facilitating this webinar this morning, and I am joined here by some amazing colleagues. On the Q&A box and helping us keep track of your questions and comments is Ronnie Larson. We also have Mandy Paradise here. She is our program supervisor for our prevention and intervention program. And Camille Goldie is also joining us this morning. She is our suicide awareness program supervisor. We have a lot to share with you this morning, but we will be offering you some opportunities to contribute to our learning as we ask you to share out some of your best resources and favorite things that you are using in the areas of mental health and social emotional learning. We also have our normal partners in this webinar series, the Washington Student Achievement Council. They will not be joining us specifically for this webinar this morning, but they will be the ones who will host the copy of this recorded webinar. It lives on their Ready, Set, Grad website. And if you ever want to go back and take a look, just Google Ready, Set, Grad. And when you get there, type in Wednesday webinar in their search box, and you will find all of our archived webinars for this series this year. This is number 4 of 7, or pardon me, number 3 of 7. So we are excited to have you here this morning. Just really briefly, always want to ground us in the work that our agency is doing to support you out in the field and the students that you work with and families that you work with. So you can see on the slide here our somewhat newly revised, it's not quite so new anymore, vision, mission, and values. And I'm not going to read these to you because I'm assuming you've probably seen these before. We put them in darn near every presentation we give. But I do, of course, want to point out today that our topic is going to really focus on primarily the value of the whole child, but also in collaboration and service with you, and always in through the lens of looking at continuous improvement and equitable resources for all our kiddos. So glad to have you on board. And here's just a really simple version of what the 3 main buckets of conversation are that we're going to have with you today. Obviously, when we started to look at mental health and social emotional learning, we could spend hours, if not days, with you, sharing out resources and ideas about those topics. So we added a little bit of a subtext to this because it is the holiday season, and we do know that our students often have a little bit more trouble this time of year with the stresses of the season. Uh-oh. Just finding from our Q&A that you all are not seeing what is on my screen, so we're going to take just a quick second to make sure we're fixing that for you. Sorry about that, y'all. Bear with us and give us just a second.
We were already doing that.
We're sharing the right screen. So if someone could type in the Q&A if you are now seeing a very colorful slide or now seeing the first slide of the webinar, please let us know if you're still seeing black.
We see it. Yeah.
We see it. Okay. Geez, oh, Petey. Sorry, y'all. We are back online, so I'm going to just give you a quick sec to see the visual of what I just explained auditorily, but try to move through these a little bit so that we can get caught up with our timeline. So here we are just talking today with you 3 main buckets, because when we thought about mental health and social emotional learning, we realized it could take us a long time to share out everything that we have to share. So with this idea in mind of the holiday season and the additional stresses that staff and students are experiencing this time of year, we're going to talk a little bit about self-care for staff and some of the systems level supports that we should be focused on this time of year, and then also give you some somewhat quickly and easily implementable support strategies that you can use with your students in the next couple of weeks as they gear up for winter break, and you do as well, but also could be applicable anytime. And then, of course, we will keep you in mind some basic terminology as we go. This slide will be up again at the end, but wanted you to be aware of some of the many folks we have here at OSPI who can support you in the areas of social emotional learning and mental health, and some of our main contributors to this website or to this webinar. And so we would like to first give you a chance to give us a couple of your top of mind issues during this time of year. I would love to see you give us your thoughts around what are the things that are really percolating up for you during the holiday season and the December months. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to type some things in that Q&A box. Obviously, everybody will be able to see your thoughts. So we hope we can kind of capture a little bit of some of the things that you're working on and dealing with this time of year. Also remember, as Tony said, that we will be capturing all of the comments and questions that you type in that Q&A box, and we'll be able to email that out to all the participants. So if you see something that somebody is suggesting as a resource later on in the webinar that you want to come back to, you will have that opportunity. So again, just giving you another minute or two to see what kinds of things are going on for you.
First one came in.
What do we got, Ronnie?
Students dealing with homes that are fractured.
Sure, fractured homes, stressful home environments. We know that winter break can be a time period where students get a little bit anxious about not having their school hours and not having their access maybe to their peers and their safe environment and the adults that are champion for them.
Students in academic and social emotional crisis.
Okay, social emotional crisis this time of year. We really were excited to present this webinar. Social emotional learning and mental health continues to be one of the most requested topics by many of our support staff in our schools. So we're happy to be with you this morning talking about some things to hopefully help you in that area, knowing of course that an hour is pretty quick. So again, we'll send out kind of the ideas that were top of mind of you all for this year as we capture those in your Q&A box, but we're going to go ahead and continue on with what we want to share out. And just want to ground us a little bit in some of the work that we know many of the listeners on this webinar are engaged in, which is school counseling. Want to remind you all of the framework that OSPI has posted on our website. We've linked it here for you. We know that students cannot fully engage in their education if we are only focused on social emotional. We got to make sure we are also integrating that academic and career and college readiness piece into the whole big picture of serving those students and giving them hope for their future. But we have obviously school counseling, where this is a heavy piece of the work they do. This model is here for you. It's full of tools, standards that you can align your program with, both ethical and like content, and then a whole section of tools from the American School Counselor Association. This can be a really great tool for you in aligning your programs with best practices. And then a little bit later, as we will talk about in this webinar, school counselors really should be collaborating with the other support staff in the schools, especially this time of year, our school psychologists, our school nurses, our school social workers, to provide that integrated support system for students so they're really having all aspects of that whole child's needs being met. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few minutes. want to turn it over to Mandy. She's going to share a little bit with you about what some of the holiday break may mean for your students.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. You know, that question that came in about fractured homes, it really rings true about the social context of the students and how that can be amplified during breaks, especially a holiday or winter break. So I'm going to run through these considerations that students may have more exposure to family dynamics. That can be both positive and negative. Family dynamics may also increase in intensity. Parenting or visitation plans might be adjusted or changed. So sometimes folks are going to visit a parent that they don't normally see, or they're spending time with a guardian who has come in for the holidays. They may also have changed schedules around different key dates. Schedule shifts that increase or reduce time with some family members. So if they're used to seeing primary caregivers and are now seeing folks that they don't always get to see, or vice versa. Travel, hosting, or visiting bring very different places and faces. So some kids might be traveling this time of year, others might have travel visitors staying with them. So there's extra folks sleeping on the couch, or you have to give up, I think we've all seen National Lampoon when you have to give up the bedroom for somebody else. So not only are people, places, and times changing, but even the security of having your own space gets shifted around for some of our students. There's a lot of overstimulation, but the other extreme of that can be an extreme sense of isolation during this time of year, especially when we don't have our school schedule. Kids might be at home spending more time by themselves because their parents are still working through the break, or their siblings or half-siblings have gone off to see other family members. So there can be a lot of new things happening, but also a time of loneliness or isolation might occur. There are also concerns or adjustments related to finances and food. Many families are working really hard to ensure that daily needs are met, but given the holidays that can occur this time of year, there might be added emphasis on having bigger meals or more things, and gifts are part of that for a lot of families we work with. There can be a sense of scarcity or comparison that sometimes happens, which brings us to our last point about balancing expectations and reality, and helping students to navigate comparisons among peers and friends. So how much do they have access to the supports that they normally would have, without also balancing some of the feelings of just wondering if they measure up in terms of how other people experience this time of year.
Sure. Thanks, Manny. Lots of great considerations for our students, but also some of our staff may experiencing a lot of those same things. And this time of year, especially with the extra everything that comes with the holiday season, staff may be feeling extra tired and stressed from trying to meet students' additional needs. And as this picture reminds us, it is incredibly important that we care for ourselves before we care for our students, or at least at the same time, so that we are able to provide them the supports that they need.
So we're going to look at some self-care terms and just get some common language situated. The first term we're looking at is compassion satisfaction. And this is the positive feelings we get when we realize that compassion we put into working with others is resulting in some relief, growth, and or healing. We also have compassion fatigue. The fatigue, the emotional distress, sometimes apathy that results from constant demands of caring for others. And this includes our teaching professions and our social supports that we provide in schools. Then it can oftentimes bring a sense of weariness. And finally, burnout, the physical, emotional exhaustion that might include negative self-concepts and or job attitudes, and the loss of concern and feeling for others.
So as the research continues to confirm, the ripple effect of learning about and trying to mitigate the challenges that surround the lives of our students can really affect our own health and well-being. So while we often feel satisfaction and enjoyment with our jobs, when we experience compassion fatigue, we need to pay attention. Too much can lead to burnout and even cause us to experience vicarious trauma, which, if it is not addressed early on, can lead us into secondary trauma, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. If not addressed, we ultimately could be affected physically, similar symptoms that are similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, even though we weren't directly exposed to that trauma ourselves. So how do we know if the exhaustion we're feeling is no longer healthy? Here's a tool.
Yeah, so you know, doing a personal self-assessment can be done many ways. Sometimes you know yourself well enough. One of the prompts I often put out there is, who am I when I'm well? And this particular tool can help us navigate some of that. So this tool is shared by Ron Hertel, OSPI Supervisor for Social Emotional Learning, and it's the Professional Quality of Life Scale, or ProQual for short. It's a great way to monitor compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue, and potential burnouts. And this can be used for individuals or groups. It's free, we love that, and it only takes about 5 minutes to complete. There's also multiple languages. If you use the entire SelfCare tool, to which we've provided a link, and then we can put that in the chat box later on, you'll get a self-rated score in the areas of compassion satisfaction, burnout, and secondary trauma, and a brief description of what the score might mean for you. Some school administrators use this tool as a blind survey to aggregate the general stress and satisfaction felt by staff. And then you can implement programming based upon what your data shares with you. You'll find also that your score might lie outside of a positive range, or if you just know without a tool that you need some self-care, here are some of those 8 suggested areas in your life that you might want to focus on. Ultimately, with as much as we know about the impacts of stress and trauma, self-care is an ethical obligation for those who care and support others who are struggling. Self-care is an intentional activity. To do it well, we really have to plan for it. It can be helpful to think of it in categories such as the ones you see on this slide, and feel free to take a quick picture of this page, jot down some ideas for yourself, and hang on to it on the refrigerator, or sometimes I set it as my phone screensaver just to keep me considering my own self-care.
Also, in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see a link to Chapter 2. Well, it's a link to OSPI's book on compassionate teaching. And in Chapter 2 of that book, The Heart of Teaching, Learning and Teaching, you'll see some additional ideas aligned with these 8 categories. It's a free download for you, and hopefully that link will get you right to it without any trouble. And then I wanted to share out with you another book that was recommended to me by Dana Anderson. He's the superintendent of ESD 113. And this book has been a national bestseller for quite a few years. I think it came out in 2009, but it was new to me, and I thought I'd put it back out there for you all. It's called Trauma Stewardship. If you want to take a deeper dive into some strategies for self-care and can make the time, because after all, winter break is coming, so maybe you've got a few minutes on your hand coming up soon, then this book can be a really great resource. For those of you who don't have time or aren't into books, we also have a link here to a TED Talk by the author of this book. It's a much more condensed, shorter version of some of the strategies that she shares out around taking care of yourself if you are a caregiver. And we provided you with one more thought on another resource that's out there about managing compassion fatigue specifically. It's another TED Talk by another well-known author, and she gives some really nice concrete strategies for dealing with some of the issues that come up when we are feeling fatigued and leading into burnout.
Okay, thank you. This is Camille Goldie again. So one of the tools that I just want to share to reinforce that self-care and acknowledge that we really need to be, working on taking care of ourselves so that we can regenerate and come back at the new year. This is a great self-care checklist for the holidays, highlighting really just the importance of acknowledging that holidays may not always be a happy time for everyone. There may be things that come up, and also just kind of adding in my own editorial comments that go along with this checklist, things about, good and healthy boundaries. Maybe just because it's been a tradition doesn't mean it has to always be a tradition. If it's something that just is creating so much stress for you, and just giving, putting it out there that you have the permission to kind of recreate what that looks like for you. So this is a good short read.
Yep, I was able to condense it down to a one-pager front and back, so it's not too bad. Okay, so again, want to give you a chance to share out some of the things that you might be using for self-care that have been successful on your end. I put this graphic organizer up as a visual because I want us to be mindful that we do have need for self-care in mind, body, and spirit. And so if there's something you've been using or that's been really working for you, I'll give you a couple minutes here to type information into that Q&A box. And just a reminder that we will be able to send that out to all the participants. So if you see an idea that goes by and you can't quite keep up, then we will make sure that obviously you're going to get that out as a link here after the webinar. So we're going to just give a couple of minutes of quiet time for you to think and share. Hopefully you saw that prompt on our advertisement of this webinar that we'd be asking you to contribute. So we'll give you a minute here to see what you come up with. How are we doing, Ronnie? Are we seeing any? Okay. Maybe some of you are thinking and still typing. I just want to apologize. We had our reminders set to go out for this webinar with our Aussie newsletter on Monday, and that actually went out this morning. And so you may have not seen that prompt to come prepared with some ideas and strategies. So no problem if you didn't have that ready. We will certainly hopefully see that some of the things we've shared with you today are things you can take home and think about and try.
Hey, Kim, this is Mandy. I'm wondering if I could share an example of one of my self-care strategies.
That'd be awesome.
Ooh, and we've got a couple others. For me, this time of year, getting a walk in before 3 o'clock, because I need to see the sunshine. Just to be reminded that before work and after work, it's usually dark out.
Right.
Ronnie, it sounds like we have some questions.
Good week for walks.
What's popping up?
That's what one of our ladies said. Long walks, upbeat films, visiting relatives. And
Oh,
another
nice.
one is self-care, leaving work at work and spending more time with family.
Gosh,
Baking
leaving work
cookies,
at work.
watching movies.
I want to talk to whoever's leaving work at work because I need some help with that. So we appreciate that you all have got some ideas. I hope you're utilizing those, especially this time of year, as it can be extra stressful with everything that's happening, whether you are someone who ascribes to the holidays or not.
And I think that that's really part of the meat of this conversation and the self-care strategy is that with so much hustle and bustle or change in schedules or different demands or new faces and places that are demanding our time and attention, and our usual schedules being different and daycare being different, whatever it is, that fitting in those self-care strategies might even be harder on break.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if you dive into the resource that Camille was talking about and that she provided for you, the very first one says take time for yourself. And we all know that often those of us, especially who are helpers, tend to prioritize our own needs last. So this was why we led with this section of the webinar first, because before we dive into mental health and social emotional learning, just want to really encourage you all to do what we all need to do probably better, which is to take care of ourselves. So thank you for your contributions. We're going to go ahead and switch gears now and talk a little bit about systems work, and in particular, the idea of providing those tiered systems for our students, where we have some of our supports and services that are being presented and utilized with all of our students in a more foundational way. And then, of course, we're kicking it up a notch when we have those students who need a little bit more intentional work from us and a more intentional supports from the folks who are there at school to help them with their, whether it be academic, social, emotional, or personal social needs. And then finally, we all know those small number of kiddos who really need everything on the kitchen sink, and where our school psychologists and social workers, community organizations, all kinds of folks might be coming in to provide those wraparound services that are so critical for those students and families in crisis. So keeping it real around the system improvement work, we're going to share a resource with you, but also a couple of strategies that are more systems level, but are really still things you could be thinking about, like in the next couple of weeks, do we have this ready to go? Is this a place we need to focus a little time and attention? So Mandy's going to take you through some important distinctions about vocabulary in this section of the webinar. Want to be really clear about what mental health means, because there's a lot of confusion out in the field about mental health versus mental illness and the role that our school support staff play in helping students with their mental health. So Mandy, you're up.
Thanks, Kim. So again, just setting a common language opportunity. So let's talk about mental health, which we have defined as a state of well-being in which one realizes one's own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, and self-regulate during stressful times, can work productively and fruitfully, and is also able to make contributions to the community. These key terms are kind of important because sometimes, as Kim said, there can be conflation with the words mental health and when folks really mean to talk about mental illness or mental health challenges. Also, we have social emotional learning. We have that defined as a process in which children and adults acquire and apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals and feel better, and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions.
Not a problem at all. We got that
No.
handled, right? Holy moly.
You're right. And,
Components.
you know, 2 notes on mental health and social emotional learning definitions. They're really long, but it's because they're complex, nuanced things, right? And it's easy to see how we can sometimes conflate terms or say one thing when we reference and mean to impact or have outcomes in another. And they do have a lot of overlap. I don't know that you could do one without the other. Lastly, we have school climate, which is the quality and character of school life. It is based on patterns of students, parents, and school personnel's experiences of school life. It also reflects norms, goals, values, interpersonal relationships, teaching and learning practices, and organizational structures.
And that's where some of that systems work comes in, and the idea around positive behavior intervention. Lots of the acronym language that's out there is really just about, do our kids feel safe and do they feel engaged and enjoy their school, and what are we doing to continue to improve that? So Mandy?
Right, yeah, and just a note that the most common mental disorders among children and teens are anxiety, depression, and ADHD. A mental illness can affect the ways people think, feel, behave, and interact with others. For school counselors and other support staff, they're increasingly asked to help students develop coping strategies for disorders, which can be appropriate depending upon the level of impact the student and the staff, and to match the level of training that that staff person has had. However, students with mental health challenges need greater levels of support from professional counselors as well, especially when the impacts are severe or lasting and affect daily activities. So for most school-based support staff, even if they've had additional training and licensure, given the vast amount of responsibilities and typical caseloads in a school setting, they should work with their school team and the family to refer students to licensed professional treatment providers for mental health therapy or other behavioral health needs such as substance abuse.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. I think there's a lot of interest in seeing counselors do more mental health. That's what I always hear out in the field, and our school psychologists and our school social workers are being asked to do the same thing. So we really wanted to be clear about what mental health means versus what mental illnesses are and how those may need higher levels of treatment than what we can be providing in that school setting with all of those various support staff that we may or may not have access to. And in some communities, we got to acknowledge that our school counselors or our school social workers, maybe even our psychologists, are acting in that role as well, because there may not be those resources in the community. So just wanting to be clear that we know it varies from school to school, and depending on the access you have in your community, you may or may not be having to provide more of those resources yourself, but wanting to be really clear on that definition.
And bringing it one more time, kind of as we start talking about systems and system improvement terms, just being familiar and working with your colleagues to have a sense of what any of these terms mean for you in your context is going to be really important. We also see things like mental health stigma that impact the creation of these system supports. So for us, when we think of mental health stigma, being ready and willing to ask the hard questions can be really important, and just having a shared language, but the shared outcomes is also really valuable.
Right.
Lastly, we wanted to say that sometimes students that you work with, you may know that they have a diagnosed mental illness or mental health challenge. You might know students who have anxiety disorder or depression or some other diagnosis, but that doesn't mean that they don't have good mental health. They may have lots of coping strategies, lots of support. So watching our own stigma around how we might be placing those concepts into our systems creations is also something to be mindful of.
Definitely. Thank you, Mandy. Our definition of social emotional learning came from the National School Climate Center, just as an FYI, and then we, of course, take our school climate definition from the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, however you want to pronounce it. And then last but not least, I wanted to provide you with an opportunity if you are interested in providing OSPI Social Emotional Learning work group. with some feedback. They have a survey that's out right now. They're asking us to push it to as many people as we possibly can, including students and families. So if you have some folks in your building who you could get this to, who would be willing to take it and provide that feedback, our office is working pretty hard on trying to develop the indicators of social emotional learning to help staff be able to know what things to focus on within the school system. So that would be an option for you there. We've pasted the link to the survey.
We're going to get that link into the chat box by the end of the webinar.
Yep. And otherwise, it's linked here on these slides. And these slides, again, will be posted. So all the things you're seeing that are linked are live for you. So we'll make it easy, hopefully, for you to go back and be able to access some of these additional pieces. So thinking again of systems work, obviously this isn't something you would take on between now and winter break, but there might be some pieces that you are thinking about already in terms of needing to do some work on your entire K-12 system of supports for students in your district and in your building. So this is a protocol that has been developed within our Center for the Improvement of Student Learning, or CISL. We have staff here who have spent a lot of time researching best practices and working those into this very comprehensive model about how to support students. In 2016, the legislature actually created a bill that was asking for us to come up with a variety of strategies to close educational opportunity gaps, and the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight and Accountability Community, EOGOAC, if you've ever heard that acronym, they are tasked with this work, and so they've been directly connected with this protocol development as well. It does incorporate multi-tiered systems of supports, but it also really looks at the integration of community-based resources and supports into that academic setting and the environment within your schools and districts. So it's really calling on us to think about where we can get additional support in our community for the work that we're doing, because we all know that oftentimes we have more students with needs than we can adequately staff as school support personnel. And so looking out into the community and seeing what kind of supports are out there that they can help with. Our district here, where my kids are in school, are reaching out to our faith-based organizations right now. We've got a interaction with a local nonprofit where they're providing some of our supports to our Tier 3 students and families.
And so many of our schools who, when I think of community partnerships, I also think of the regional supports at the ESD level.
Oh yeah,
and they have
absolutely
excellent programming and prevention centers that are providing behavioral health supports through direct staff that are often in schools, or to help, school counselors.
Substance abuse, all kinds of things that can come out of your ESD as well. So again, especially for those schools and communities that don't have a lot of resources, that ESD is going to be your best bet for finding some solid supports in the areas that you may not have the capacity in your building. And then we've got some staff members here who are directly connected to this work, and one of them is on our slide of all the different staff here you can connect with if you need some additional supports or have questions. So that'll come up again at the end. And now Mandy's going to share with you some broader kind of system level strategies that you could actually be thinking about in the next couple of weeks that might help make the last 2 weeks of 2018 go a little bit better for your whole school. So here you go, Mandy, you're up.
So we kind of lump this into 4 main categories. The first 2 are collaboration and connection. So if we were thinking systems-wide as collaboration, these will look like things like having a refresher about referral processes for all support staff. So talking to your peers and colleagues about what community supports are out there and who might be making those referrals. So collaboration is key. But also how we do that collaboration, and just a refresher on how things get funneled through the school system, whether it's through you as a school counselor, and checking your forms, making sure people know where to drop off referrals, or if it's a Skyward system, how folks do that, and reminding them that you are there for that collaboration. Community-based resources, are staff connected and using them? So refreshing those partnerships this time of year can be helpful. Connection. One of our key examples here was about link crew, or student and peer leader groups, and checking in with new students. This is a great time to check in with not only students who are new, but if there's any kids that have been flagged for needs or have been identified for who would benefit from some additional supports. And when we think about connection, how are staff supporting students who have anxiety about being with family and or away from school during this time of year. I know it's easy on a personal note to be so consumed with what I'm going to do during this break that I'm not always spending the time I need to check in with both my peers and with the kids that we might work with. Our other two buckets we wanted to say for system supports look like consistency and cultural sensitivity. When we think about consistency, we really wanted to emphasize that having maintained routines in the school setting can be really helpful, and also finding ways to build in some extra as needed availability. So amplifying and giving a lot of access to, excuse me, giving access to places where kids can tap into your support. The consistency of having posted office hours on your door, or maybe during the morning announcements or reminders, so that kids, as their need arises or they might identify that they could use extra supports, to just that you're there and available. Cultural sensitivity, this is a key part of our holiday and winter breaks. Some of our prompts include how are schools, or how are our students learning about various holidays? What traditions are students experiencing, and are they able to share with their peers? And when are staff supporting those who are not celebrating holidays or don't have the funds to celebrate in the same way that other folks might be? And a last note on cultural sensitivity, we also know that there's economic cultural context as well. So again, sometimes folks talk about or reference the culture of poverty, and just being mindful that with all the giving and the gift exchanges, and sometimes even just the food concerns, that everybody might have a different take on this time of year. Some who are engaged in holidays, and some who aren't practicing any holidays during this break.
And I gotta say, Mandy, I know I've been out of schools now for 2 years, but the last year that I was in the high school, I was so impressed with how increasingly open-minded and sort of connected that our students can be, and the sensitivity that they sometimes have, more so even than us adults always think about, around making sure that all of their peers feel included and that they're not feeling isolated. And this is just one of those times of year where I think it's really key for our students to be reaching out to other students as well, because we just know, that's why we had a whole section on it, the staff are just as stressed, and that there's a lot going on and it's busy. But you know, as we have concerts and we have holiday assemblies and we have things that are meant to be fun and exciting and joyous and festive, that we just keep that equity lens on everything that we're doing, and really try to see things through the eyes of those students who may be not part of the dominant, or not dominant, but majority culture in that area. And I think that that is something that's important regardless of where you live in the state, because we know that there are a lot of communities where the predominant culture is not maybe necessarily the one that would celebrate Christmas.
Right.
And that holiday celebration can look very different across the state of Washington. This time of year can be very different from one building to the next. So we hope some of these things are helpful for you to be thinking about. Obviously, again, in an hour, we can't meet everyone's needs in social emotional learning and mental health conversation, but just putting these things out there as something for us always to be thinking about. And this time of year just happens to be a time of year where we need to be extra on top of these thoughts. So we want to go now into the last section of our webinar. It's sort of the quick and easy, down and dirty stuff that we want to throw your way as some things you might need right now. Oh my gosh, that's why I'm online with you. So I've been waiting. So we've got some resources, some quick links for you to some additional things if you have the time, but also a few things that we're hoping resonate and give you something to work from. So just to start with, I think sometimes what's so hard for students in this time of year is feeling really isolated and alone, and that they're not included in some of what's happening around the building and around the school and around their family community. So really having them take a moment to pause and think about who is here to help me when I need it. And as school staff increasingly become the champions and the supports for so many of our kiddos who are experiencing lack of stability in their home environment, or any of the things we know that we've got our kids thinking about this time of year, this is something that I think could be done at any point in time. to just have a student think about, who can I look at and think about as a person I could connect with when I need that help. And this is just a nice visual way to do that. And they can take it with them. They can put it up in their room. They can post it on their refrigerator if it's something that their family's aware of. And then really sometimes if they can just see they've got at least one adult who's there for them, and or a peer who's willing to act in that role or be their buddy, that can make a huge difference for their mental health and for their feeling of connection and support. And now we've got Mandy's going to come share a few more quick and easy with you. We're going to bounce back and forth between Camille, and I, as we've all got some nice stuff to share out with you. Oh, and I did want to mention that several of the things that we are going to be sharing with you are coming from the graphic on the right. The Providence group has a whole series of resources. We pulled several of them out of the grief activities, but they can be adapted and applied in other settings. Anytime you see the Providence icon on the slide, just know that's where we got that from, and that link is here for you to go back and take a look.
So bringing it back to the field, this is something that we gained from all the folks in school settings that are doing things like PBIS, but specifically Pack's Good Behavior Game. So we wanted to highlight Tootling, a behavior intervention. So Tootling can really be used to improve the quality of interactions between students, and it discourages the focus on negative behaviors while encouraging and emphasizing focus on positive. And it's another one of those peer-to-peer activities too. So classrooms are often set up to identify or catch kids being bad, but Tootling gives us an opportunity to catch kids being good. So engaging kids with Tootling is a positive intervention that can be added to existing classroom systems. And it basically looks like providing a Tootle ticket. So a Tootle ticket is who was doing what did they do, for whom, and who the tootler is. So this is an example, but you could create a Tootle ticket or Tootle system in any way. And this is great for young kids, but it can also be adapted for your secondary students too. As Kim was saying, you know, especially with this ever-growing ability for us to lean into our students as co-teachers and peers in our whole systems changes, that we can look to them for how to highlight each other in meaningful ways and what it looks like to really catch kids growing and catch kids doing well.
Right. And the link at the bottom of the page here will take you directly to the entire lesson plan that goes along with what we put here on the screen. We just took a little snippet of it, but it's got lots of more kind of practical ideas about how to use this in your buildings.
We also wanted to share with you some memes, again, things you could implement today. So an easy reminder to get help would look like having some sort of prompt for kids. These could be signs that folks put into the bathroom stalls or put in the hallways. It could be something that you show on your morning TV or screen announcements. We have prompts that say, got the wintertime feels? We're here to help. And it just reminds and encourages anybody in your building maybe to swing by the counseling office and do a good positive check-in.
Right, and again, thinking about that referral process that we mentioned earlier when Mandy was talking about some of that systems work, making sure that your posters obviously are aligned with whatever your referral process is and who the students have available to go see, especially on a as needed basis.
Yeah.
It's really important to make sure that those are clear on those posters. So this is the puppy part of the presentation here. Next one up is Camille.
So this is our favorite resource, or at least mine these days, Gizmo's Possum Guide to Mental Health. And this is, I think, intended for younger students, but I would argue it works for the lifespan of all of us because it's so cute with puppies on every page. And it really does an excellent job. It's a downloadable book for free from the state of Connecticut. And so it does a great job of just really naming mental health, giving practical examples of what those behaviors and feelings look like, and then takes you to the page that you see on the screen, which is a plan for supporting your own mental health. And this is something that in our maybe clinical world we would call a safety plan, but really, I mean, this is just a really good plan for everyone to have for themselves. If you have a student that needs a little bit of guidance on how to manage those behaviors and feelings and how to redirect, this is an awesome tool for that. So we highly recommend it, and I think we all are, either doing it or have it on our agenda to do for ourselves.
Yeah. So what I loved about this, Camille, is especially some of the things on the checkoff list really reminded me of the graphic organizer we showed at the beginning. This, of course, speaks to my heart as a very concrete, sequential thinker. I love making lists. So for your kids who love lists, this can be really awesome. That other graphic organizer was a little more abstract random for me. So meeting different kids' needs as well. You've got lots of options here.
And one of the things too about our systems work or some of our words, how we use our language, that this is great for being a mental health plan, and it talks about how to improve mental health and supports, but it's doing it through social emotional activities, right?
That's right.
So again, these two topics constantly are overlapping and informing the same work.
That's why we put them together. We're geniuses. Yes. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to bring up, Regina Brown is our elementary school counselor vice president for the Washington School Counselor Association, and she's been talking to me a lot about toxic masculinity and some of the things that she's researching and experiencing and sort of looking into around the ways in which we acculturate our boys sometimes in this culture. And when we're talking about feelings, we're talking about social emotional learning, you know, oftentimes this has been a harder area for us to talk with our boys than it has been our girls. And in some of our cultural aspects, we tend to allow for the expression of anger much more than we do the expression of grief. And so I wanted to present this resource in this way because I want us to be really thinking about how are we promoting feelings with both males and females. How are we teaching them around the different feelings we experience and how to express those? What are positive coping techniques? And this particular resource, which again came from the Providence document that we linked you to, has a couple of worksheets. They look very similar and they act in a similar way, but they're basically teaching students some of the more positive ways that you can express these two feelings. And we know this time of year, these are just a couple things that popcorn out a little bit more than maybe we hope they do, but we want to be sure we have some resources in our back pocket ready to go to help those students process through those feelings. Also, you may have seen the King 5 news story recently on Sydney Reed at Peter G. Schmidt Elementary School in the Tumwater School District. She has created a chill room and actually a place for the students to come and have a place to de-escalate, debrief with her when they're really needy. They've set up some similar areas in the pods of their school for students who maybe don't need quite as intensive of a moment to relax, but need just a break and a quick time to chill out so that they don't continue to escalate. And this resource, of course, gives you some other ideas about how to use these very visual graphic handouts in a way to help students think about these emotions. So I loved that there were two things that were similar and yet different that you could utilize here really quickly if you have that need. And then, of course, during the holiday season is always a time where we know that our students who have experienced especially a recent loss or are dealing with loved ones who are really ill may be especially prone to feeling really sad around the holiday season, and as they experience those family traditions and connections without maybe that family member present, how do we help them process through that going into that holiday season? So this is yet another somewhat simple but potentially powerful way that you can help a student organize their thoughts around what they're worried about in the potential loss of a loved one who may be really ill, that hasn't happened yet, what they're thinking about in that line of thinking with that person in mind, and then also what do they miss about their lost loved ones. And this resource goes on to provide you with some visuals about how you can turn this into art projects, kind of a memorial of sorts of things that remind you about that loved one in a more art-based way. We just, again, have an hour. So we picked a few things to share out with you that were relatively simple to do as we lead into the last 2 weeks of school in 2018. And then we also link to you here. It's a resource that, again, may not happen in the next 2 weeks for you, but it's a 8-part lesson on grief support groups for the school setting, and it's a guide specific to offering that in schools. It may be something that you might want to start before the winter break hits. If you've got some kids who are really struggling, you might find some resources in there that you could do prior to, and then continue to support them when they come back, because we all know that re-entry after winter break can be just as rough as the lead up. And so how are we going to think about being there and available for our kids as they come out of this next 2 weeks?
And Kim, just as a final thought to offer up to our folks who are listening today about both the concepts of gender and on grief, that early in the webinar we talked about the different phases and places and change in schedules that are occurring for students and our own families. But I wanted to do just a quick brief coverage of some of our LGBT students and also our trans students. This time of year, they may be seeing family members whom they don't normally see, and they may be taken out of the social supports that they have established in their school buildings and with caring adults like our school counselors and teachers. So it's another opportunity to think about sometimes the grief that the families can project on their lesbian, bi, trans, and gay students, that sometimes our students aren't always being warmly recepted in wider family circles. And then for lots of our LGBT students, they do have tons of support. So just one more lens to remember that things can often change up this time of year.
Absolutely. Thanks, Manny. That's a great addition. So want to continue on here with some additional resources for you that Camille's going to share out.
Okay, so one thing to always keep in mind, I think, is resources that we have in our pockets, not only during the holiday season, but all year round, around students who are at risk for suicide and need support. So really just being mindful of the rates, the increase in rates, and the students who are more vulnerable and kind of need those resources. One of the things that I like to always ask people to do is put the Suicide Prevention Lifeline phone number in their phone. I think that's a great thing that you could offer students before they leave. And then also the website offers some great free resources. So your school could go there and download their banner and put it on the web page to be sharing out, or however else you do communications with families. This is a great resource to share. And then lastly, the crisis text line is a great resource for students. It's free, it's anonymous. They have excellent strategies for de-escalating and just really helping students kind of identify, like, what are they feeling and how can we deal with those feelings. This is probably one of the best things I feel like we can offer students, just because it's so accessible for them. Texting is how they communicate. So this is something that if you go to the website, you can download some of their flyers and things to share out, as well as just while they're in your office or in your classroom, inviting them to get out their phones and program in a line is pretty exciting for them.
That's the way my two children communicate.
Yeah.
I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader, and I can talk to them more by text than in person sometimes, I tell you. I also just wanted to add on to what Camille just shared and let you know that that graphic in the middle is actually a connection to a video that came out just last week from Ed Week. It is 8 minutes and 45 seconds of information that a school in Virginia, how they are tackling this topic, the way in which they are bringing this out to students in a much less stigmatized way. How do we get this out? How do we talk about it? How do we have those crucial conversations with our students so that they're not hiding and afraid, and that they know where to go to get help? And as Camille has told me, she's really clear in saying this is not a time of year where we see an increase in the number of suicides. So we don't present this to you because we want you to be extra worried that this is going to happen this time of year or over a break. But it's just, again, as we're talking about mental health, we're talking about social emotional learning, a big part of our job as supporters of students is to provide them the information that they need to be successful in supporting themselves. And so these are some great resources for you to get out in your schools. And I encourage you to go take a look at this video. It's fresh off the press and really had some great ideas in it for schools to think about how you're bringing this issue to light, so that we take away that stigma of mental health. We take away that stigma of suicide. The school counseling community just lost a really great advocate in Dave Forrester. He lost his battle with this. And in part, I think it was because we didn't do enough to engage with him and make sure he knew he had those supports, and he did a lot of the same things we see our students do with pushing away the people that want to help. So really is an issue that's front and center for me this time of year. This is my first holiday season having to deal with that myself. So wanted to make sure that we're all thinking about these things as well, because they do unfortunately continue to happen to our youth, as you can see on this slide, second leading cause of death for our kiddos in our schools. So, okay, on that heavy note, we want to take just a really quick breather. Let's take a deep breath together. Okay, mindfulness is important as we get enmeshed in these thoughts, taking care of ourselves so that the trauma that our kids are experiencing isn't impacting us. Got to practice that as well. So I want to give you one last opportunity if there's anything you would like to contribute to our webinar. Obviously, we know there are so many other great things out there. I'm sure there's wonderful things you're doing in your own work that we would be more than happy to share out more broadly. If you want to type it into that Q&A box, we will be sending this out to all the folks who registered for the webinar so that they can have access to this, and then also be posting this webinar again on the Ready, Set, Grad website for the Washington Student Achievement Council. Usually takes us a couple weeks to get it up, but it will be there. And we'll try to get this one up as quickly as we can, since we know we've encouraged you to go back to some of the links we provided in the next 2 weeks. So we will do our best. Is there anything that you want to contribute? Would encourage you to just type anything in as it comes up for you. And again, knowing that our reminders didn't get out in a timely way, that we're encouraging you to be ready for these opportunities. No pressure, no stress, no expectations.
And that just because of our quick timeline, all the things that do get added to the chat box, we'll be sure to catalog and make available.
That's right. So one last time, I want to give you those contacts for staff here at OSPI who are really directly connected to the work of social emotional learning and mental health. This is by no means a comprehensive list. We have many other staff who connect to this work in a lot of ways, but these were some of the folks who contributed to this webinar and who also are really directly connected to what we've been sharing out, and would encourage you to reach out with any questions you have or need for support. That is a big part of our job here at OSPI, is to provide you with technical assistance when you have a need for supports and help in any area, really. So these are just some folks. And we do have a couple minutes left. If anyone has a burning question that didn't get answered, this would be a great time for you to type that in the Q&A box, and we can take a second just to try to answer that directly while we're still online. So if you're thinking about doing that or typing right now, please feel free to do so. I'm just going to say thank you on behalf of all of us here. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen in today, and for all the things you do to support your students. And want to just remind you that this is a series of webinars that OSPI and the Student Achievement Council offer each month. And so next month, since most all of us are coming back to school after winter break on the first Wednesday of the month, we shifted the January webinar so that you wouldn't come back and go, crazy, I don't have time for a webinar. So it'll be January 16th instead of January 2nd, and our normal 10:30 to 11:30 a.m. We'll be showcasing some systems level resources for elementary and middle school counseling. Our Washington School, oh my gosh, WASAC, my brain is dead. Our partners from WASAC will be joining us for that webinar, and so you'll have a full house of both organizations here to support you. We hope you'll be able to come back in January refreshed, ready to hit the 2019 school year, and join us on the 16th from 10:30 to 11:30 for some elementary and middle school counseling resources. So last chance for any questions that came in, Ronnie?
Done.
Okay, we must have done such a good job. Or you guys are off and running to lunch duty, so, or work with your other students. So if you're still on the line, thank you again for joining us. We wish you a wonderful holiday season and best wishes for a happy and healthy 2019. keep an eye out for an email from us with more information on today's webinar, and have a great day. Nope, we don't want that one. Which one ends? Stop share. There we go. And stop recording, right? End meeting. Is it this
Yeah.
one?